Audiobook Top, your new home for the finest selection of audiobooks available anywhere.
Come closer, my friends, and let us journey back, not merely in time, but into the very heart of a nascent society, forged in the crucible of zealotry and fear. Picture, if you will, the bustling, yet rigidly ordered, streets of 17th century Puritan Boston. The year is significant, for it is a time when the moral compass of a community was a stern, unyielding instrument, pointing always to a singular, unforgiving north. In this stark landscape, where every sin was a crack in the divine order, a public punishment was not just a deterrent. It was a ritual, a theatrical performance of collective virtue, designed to cleanse the body politic through the agonizing exposure of one transgressor. And so, our tale begins not with a whisper, but with a drumbeat, the rhythmic, inescapable cadence of judgment. The air, thick with the scent of pine and salt, hummed with anticipation. All eyes were drawn to the marketplace, where stood the ultimate stage of shame, the scaffold. This wasn't just a platform, it was an altar to societal rectitude, a place where private failing was transformed into public spectacle. Then, from the oppressive gloom of the prison door, she emerged, Hester Prynne. Ah, Hester. Even in her degradation, there was a defiant grace, a tragic beauty that startled the eye. She was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance, and a dark, abundant hair that framed a face of such compelling beauty it seemed almost sacrilege to associate it with sin. But the sin, or rather its indelible mark, was undeniable. Fastened to her bosom, a terrible masterpiece of her own needlework, glowed the Scarlet Letter A. Not a crude, hastily sewn badge, but an intricately embroidered, sumptuously adorned symbol, blazing with gold thread, a testament to her pride, her defiance, her refusal to be utterly crushed. And there, in her arms, clutched tightly, was Pearl. A babe barely 3 months old, yet already an embodiment of the scandal, a living, breathing Scarlet Letter herself. Hester held the infant to her breast, covering the dreaded A with her small form, as if to shield her from the venomous gaze of the townspeople, yet in doing so, only drawing more attention to the very thing she sought to hide, the crowd. Oh, the crowd! A sea of somber faces, their eyes piercing, unforgiving. The women, in particular, were a chilling chorus of righteous indignation. Their whispers, sharper than daggers, spoke of a harsher justice, a branding iron, perhaps, or a death sentence. Their own piety, a fragile edifice, seemed strengthened by Hester's downfall. They saw in her not a fellow human, but a mirror reflecting their own fears of temptation, which they swiftly shattered with their judgment. Hester stood upon the scaffold for 3 agonizing hours, an eternity measured not by the sun's slow arc, but by the ceaseless torrent of public scorn. Each gaze was a stone thrown, each whisper a lash. She could feel the stares burning into her flesh, not just on her breast, but across her entire being. Yet, to their astonishment, and perhaps their exasperation, she did not flinch, did not cry out. Her lips, though quivering, remained closed. Her beautiful face, though pale, held a strange, almost defiant composure. But what torment raged within that seemingly calm exterior? 1,000 memories, like ghosts, flickered through her mind, the innocent days of her youth, the old English home, her scholarly, slightly deformed husband, a man who was now, ominously, nowhere to be seen. The shame, the loneliness, the sheer agony of exposure, it was a crucible of suffering. She longed to scream, to tear the letter from her breast, to sink into the earth and vanish. But the tiny, squirming weight of Pearl in her arms anchored her, gave her a reason, however fragile, to endure. Pearl was her agony, yes, but also her lifeline, her constant reminder that this shaming, this scarlet mark, was not merely her own. And then, as if the scene were not already saturated with drama, a new figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Small, slightly stooped, with one shoulder higher than the other, and a face seamed with intellectual curiosity and a certain malevolent intensity. It was an Indian in his company, lending an air of the uncanny. Hester's eyes met his across the throng, and a shudder ran through her. It was her husband, Roger Chillingworth, the man she had wronged. His face, usually calm, was contorted with a sudden, dreadful understanding, a mixture of recognition and a terrifying, icy rage. He raised a finger to his lips, a silent command for her to keep his identity secret. A chill, colder than any public shame, settled upon Hester's heart. Now her suffering was not just public, but deeply, privately intertwined with a vengeance that promised to be far more insidious. The magistrates, pious men in their somber robes, exhorted her from the balcony above. Governor Bellingham, Reverend Wilson, and young Arthur Dimmesdale, his face pale and drawn, a look of profound anguish in his eyes. They pleaded, they demanded, they cajoled. Reveal the name of the father, they cried. believing that confessing his accomplice would somehow lighten her own burden, or, more accurately, fulfill their own thirst for complete justice. Dimmesdale, in a voice trembling with what seemed like a genuine, if tortured, concern, urged her to speak. "Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him," he pleaded, for, "believe me, Hester, good as he may be, he bears an awful trouble in his soul if he keep this secret in his heart." But Hester, her chin high, her voice barely a whisper, remained steadfast. "Never," she declared. "It is my firm belief that, in the agony of my soul, I have already paid the price of that silence. And more than that, my baby Pearl shall have no earthly father to share her ignominy." And so, the 3 hours ended, yet the punishment, my friends, had only just begun. The scaffold was a moment sharp and brutal, but the Scarlet Letter was a lifetime. It was a brand, not just on her clothing, but on her very soul, distinguishing her, setting her apart, stripping her of human companionship and empathy. Every step she took in the streets, every glance she met, every averted eye, was a continuation of that public shaming. The letter became her identity, the lens through which the world viewed her, forever defining her by a single, scarlet sin. This was not a punishment that concluded when the crowd dispersed, it was a shaming that never truly ended. It was the prologue to a life lived under the shadow of collective judgment, a silent, relentless torture that would shape not only Hester's destiny, but also the fates of those whose lives were inextricably bound to hers by the secrets of that fateful day. And that, my dear listeners, is where the true tragedy, the profound human drama, truly begins to unfold. The Scarlet Letter *. The very title, for many, conjures images not of illicit passion or searing human drama, but perhaps of dusty school textbooks, heavy oak lecterns, and those long, winding sentences that seem to stretch from Plymouth Rock all the way to to the very end of the chapter, often without a breath in between. I can almost see the collective sigh of 1,000 English literature students, past and present, whenever its name is uttered. Boring, they whisper, or perhaps archaic, dense, just so Puritan *. And you know what? Part of me, the honest part that wrestled with its pages initially, completely understands that sentiment. We're told it's a classic, a cornerstone of American literature, essential reading. But how many of us, upon that first, perhaps forced encounter, felt anything beyond a vague sense of obligation, or perhaps a growing dread that we'd have to write an essay on symbolism in the forest scene? It's easy to get lost in the prose, to stumble over the antiquated syntax, to feel a cultural chasm opening between our bustling, fast-paced world and the somber, unforgiving landscape of 17th-century Puritan Boston. We scan for plot points, for action, for something resembling a modern narrative arc, and often, what we find instead is contemplation. A deep, unsettling, almost suffocating contemplation. And yet, here we are, centuries later, still talking about it, still teaching it, still finding ourselves, unexpectedly, perhaps even reluctantly, drawn back to it. Why? What is it about this seemingly boring book, this meticulous exploration of shame and sin in a forgotten era, that refuses to simply gather dust on the shelf of literary history? Why does it still, in the quietest corners of our minds, haunt us? That's the question that grips me, that gnaws at me, and that, I believe, lies at the very heart of why Nathaniel Hawthorne's masterpiece endures. Because beneath that formidable linguistic exterior, beneath the puritanical garb and the meticulous historical detail, beats a human heart so raw, so exposed, so agonizingly familiar, that it transcends all notions of time or place. Hawthorne, bless his melancholic soul, wasn't writing a thrilling adventure novel. He wasn't crafting a rom-com for the masses. He was performing a dissection, a surgical probe into the very core of human nature. He was asking questions that still echo in our own lives, questions about guilt and confession, about hypocrisy and judgment, about the public face we present to the world versus the tumultuous, often messy, reality of our private selves. Think about it. We live in a world obsessed with appearances, don't we? A world where curated images dominate our screens, where public opinion can be a brutal, swift, and often unforgiving judge. We may not have scarlet letters sewn onto our bosoms, but oh, how many of us feel the searing gaze of judgment, the weight of expectation, the pressure to conform, the terror of our imperfections being laid bare for all to see. Hester Prynne, standing on that scaffold, ostracized, shamed, defiant in her suffering, is not just a character in a book, she is an archetype. She is every person who has ever felt the sting of public scorn, every soul who has carried a secret burden, Every individual who has dared to defy societal norms, or whose flaws have been magnified under the unforgiving microscope of communal scrutiny. Her struggle is not merely historical, it is existential. It is about the human spirit's capacity for endurance, for resilience, for finding beauty and purpose amidst profound suffering. And then there's Dimmesdale, isn't there? Ah, poor Dimmesdale. The respected minister, the moral beacon, whose inner torment is a slow, agonizing fire, consuming him from within. His story is a chilling exploration of what happens when guilt festers, when secrets are buried alive, when the truth is denied and a facade of piety crumbles, slowly, painfully, inevitably. Who among us hasn't, at some point, worn a mask? Who hasn't hidden a truth, big or small, for fear of rejection, for fear of losing face, for fear of dismantling the carefully constructed image we present to the world? His suffering reminds us that some wounds, self-inflicted or otherwise, refuse to heal until they are brought into the light, no matter how harsh that light may be. Even Chillingworth, that chilling embodiment of vengeful obsession, resonates with an unsettling familiarity. We see echoes of him in the bitterness that can consume us when we feel wronged, in the destructive power of holding on to grievances, in the way a desire for retribution can warp and diminish the soul. Hawthorne, through his meticulous, almost surgical prose, forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths. He doesn't offer easy answers or neat resolutions. Instead, he presents us with the messy, contradictory, often tragic reality of the human condition. He asks us to look closely at the interplay between individual conscience and communal law, between sin and salvation, between the letter of the law and the spirit of forgiveness. This book isn't boring because it lacks drama. It is rich with drama, but it's an internal drama, a psychological landscape as vast and tempestuous as any ocean voyage or battlefield. It's a drama of the soul, played out on the stage of a rigid, unforgiving society. And that, my friends, is why it haunts us. It haunts us because it holds a mirror up to our own prejudices, our own fears, our own capacity for both cruelty and compassion. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question our judgments, to understand the intricate, often painful, dance between confession and redemption. So, when we embark on this journey through the Scarlet Letter let's not be deterred by its initial stern countenance. Let's instead lean in, listen closely, and allow ourselves to be drawn into its profound depths. Because what we find there isn't just a story about a woman with a scarlet A. What we find is a timeless, resonant, and utterly unforgettable exploration of what it truly means to be human, with all our flaws, our secrets, and our enduring, often agonizing, quest for truth and peace. And that, I promise you, is anything but boring. It's essential, it's haunting, and it's waiting to reveal itself anew every single time we dare to open its pages. Good evening, my friends, or perhaps I should say, good morning, for we are about to step back into a stark and unforgiving dawn, centuries removed from our own. Imagine, if you will, the cobbled streets of Boston, not the bustling metropolis we know, but a fledgling Puritan settlement, raw and earnest, its very foundations built upon stern belief and harsher judgment. The year is 1642. The air, even now, carries a crisp autumn chill, cutting through the heavy woolen cloaks of the gathered townsfolk. Our scene unfolds before a structure as grim and unyielding as the faith that erected it, the town prison. Its oaken door, studded with iron spikes, seems to glower, a permanent scar on the face of the burgeoning town. Yet, beside this monument to human failing, a single, wild rose bush blooms, defiant and vibrant, a solitary splash of beauty against a backdrop of bleakness. A curious paradox we would do well to remember. A murmur ripples through the assembled crowd. They are a somber lot, these Puritans. Their faces, etched with the rigors of their lives, hold an almost eager severity. Their gaze is fixed, unwavering, upon that dark door. For this morning, Boston is not merely waking, it is awaiting judgment. A public spectacle, an atonement, is about to begin. The whisper of adultery hangs heavy, an unspoken accusation that already scalds the air. And then a creak. The heavy prison door groans open, and a figure emerges, bathed in the cool light of morning. It is a woman. Her name is Hester Prynne. Oh, she is a vision, my friends, a vibrant splash of color in a world of muted tones, though not in a way that brings joy. For upon her breast, stitched with a skill that betrays an almost defiant artistry, is the letter A, a vivid fiery scarlet. It is not merely a piece of fabric, it burns, metaphorically, searing itself onto the very consciousness of all who behold it, and indeed, onto Hester herself. But look closer. She does not cower. She does not shrink. From the very threshold of that grim edifice, Hester Prynne steps forth with a bearing that is nothing short of majestic. Her dark hair, rich and abundant, frames a face of striking beauty, a beauty that, even now, amidst her public disgrace, cannot be gainsaid. And in her arms, clutched close, is an infant, barely 3 months old, its tiny head nestled against the dreaded A. This child, this innocent, is the living embodiment of her transgression, yet Hester holds her not in shame, but with a fierce, protective tenderness. The crowd, which had steeled itself for a broken spirit, for downcast eyes and trembling lips, finds itself momentarily stunned. Hester Prynne meets their collective gaze not with penitence, but with an almost haughty pride. The Scarlet A was intended as a brand of ignominy, a public confession of her fall, meant to crush her beneath the weight of communal condemnation. Yet, Hester wears it. She does not merely bear it, she wears it. It is as if, through some alchemy of spirit, she has transmuted the leaden weight of shame into an armor of defiance. The letter, meant to isolate and diminish, instead seems to amplify her presence, drawing all eyes, all whispers, to her singular, vibrant figure. You can almost hear the thoughts of the Puritan women, gathered near the scaffold, their faces pinched with self-righteous indignation. She should have hidden her face, they might mutter. She should be weeping, tearing at her hair. But Hester does none of these things. She stands tall, her dark eyes sweeping across the hostile faces, a faint flush upon her cheek, a tremor perhaps in her lip, but no tears, no overt signs of surrender. The burning sensation of the A is real for her though. Not just the physical pressure of the fabric, but the searing heat of memory, of lost innocence, of a love forbidden and now laid bare. She remembers her past, flashes of her life across the ocean, the faces of those she knew, perhaps even the face of the man who shares her secret and her shame. Yet, in this moment, she chooses not to crumble under the assault of these recollections, nor under the relentless glare of her community. Here, in this raw, foundational moment, we witness the nascent power of Hester Prynne. She is an individual pitted against the formidable, monolithic force of Puritan society. They seek to strip her bare, to humble her utterly, to brand her so deeply that she might never again rise. But by wearing her shame, not merely enduring it, by holding her head high and facing the storm, Hester Prynne, almost unknowingly, begins to reclaim a piece of herself. The Scarlet Letter, intended to define her only as an adulteress, becomes, paradoxically, the very emblem through which her extraordinary strength and resilience will first manifest, then grow, and ultimately, transform. This is not the end of her humiliation, but the dramatic genesis of her enduring power. And so, the story truly begins. Come close, dear reader, and let us peer into the shadowed corners of a soul most exquisitely tormented. While Hester Prynne bore her scarlet brand bravely in the harsh daylight, another's suffering, unseen by the populace, gnawed with a far keener tooth, the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. Behold him in the pulpit, a pillar of spiritual grace, his voice a balm, a trumpet call to the righteous. The congregants revered him, their hearts swelling with adoration. His pallor, his hand pressed often to his heart, they ascribed to an excess of zeal, a physical manifestation of profound communion with the heavens. They wept at his sermons, convinced he spoke from a place of unblemished sanctity, from a soul so pure it grasped the very depths of divine love and human sin. Yet, within that frail, eloquent frame resided a secret, a festering wound that denied him peace, corrupted his very being. Hester's burned outwardly, a fiery badge of public shame. Dimmesdale's A, however, was etched onto his very soul, an invisible brand scorching him from within, leaving his spirit perpetually aflame. How could he, the revered shepherd, confess to being a wolf in sheep's clothing? The hypocrisy was a poison, slowly but inexorably destroying him. His nights were not for rest, but for a fevered dance with dread. Sleep offered no balm, only spectral accusations, visions of Hester and Pearl, their scarlet letter pulsing with an infernal glow. He rose, trembling, to self-inflicted penance rigorous fasts, weakening his already frail frame, scourging, a brutal, momentary substitution of physical pain for the ceaseless torment of conscience, and vigils, where he'd scream into the desolate emptiness, his cries swallowed by the thick New England night. These were his sacraments, born not of faith, but of a desperate, futile attempt to purify the unpurifiable. And then there was Roger Chillingworth. Ah, the very name, a serpent's hiss in the darkness. The old physician, having wormed his way into Dimmesdale's confidence, ostensibly to cure his ailing body, was in truth a leech of the soul. With chilling precision, Chillingworth probed not merely for physical ailments but for the raw, pulsing nerve of Dimmesdale's secret. He dissected every glance, every tremor, every half-spoken word. He presented hypotheses, masked as medical inquiries, which were in fact subtle accusations, driving Dimmesdale further into the suffocating chamber of his guilt. The minister felt the old man's presence like a shadow that had gained substance, a subtle, insidious torture that offered no reprieve. He knew, deep in his tormented heart, that Chillingworth was not his healer, but his tormentor, an emissary from some infernal realm come to claim him. Sometimes, in the midst of a sermon, a terrible impulse would seize him. He would speak of sin, of hidden iniquity, of the universal depravity of mankind, hinting at his own wretchedness with such passionate fervor that his congregation, far from suspecting him, would only marvel at his profound humility. "He knows the depths of human sin," they would exclaim. The irony, dear reader, was a blade turning in his gut. His veiled attempts at confession only cemented his reputation for saintliness, deepening the chasm of his isolation and hypocrisy. One night, driven by an unbearable urge for penance, by a desperate, suicidal impulse to at least touch the edge of revelation, he stole out into the darkness. The air was cold, crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. His steps led him not to the forest, nor to the sea, but to the very heart of the town's shame, the scaffold, the place where Hester had stood, publicly branded. He climbed the 3 steps, his legs heavy as lead, his chest a hollow drum of fear and self-loathing. He stood there, in the midnight gloom, where the eyes of hundreds had once fixed upon Hester, now a solitary figure, a ghost seeking retribution from himself. He stretched out his arms, mimicking the gesture of agony, and a shiver ran through him. Was this enough? No, it was a mockery, and then a sound. A cry, raw and desolate, tore itself from his throat. It was not a prayer, not a curse, but a primal shriek of despair, a sound born of 7 years of unremitting torment. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath, convinced his heart would burst from the sheer pressure of his secret. Surely this must awaken the entire town, expose his wretchedness to all. But the town slept on, undisturbed. Only one set of eyes, it seemed, had witnessed his silent agony. From a distance, a figure emerged from the shadow of the prison wall. It was Hester, holding little Pearl by the hand. They had been at Governor Bellingham's deathbed, keeping vigil. Now, they passed by the scaffold, drawn as if by an invisible thread. "Hester! Pearl!" he whispered, his voice hoarse, desperate. "Come hither! Come up hither, and tarry with me!" Hester, always responsive to a suffering soul, though she knew not the full depth of his torment, ascended the steps. Pearl, with the uncanny insight of childhood, joined them, taking Dimmesdale's hand. For a fleeting moment, the 3 of them stood together on the platform of public shame, a silent tableau under the vast, uncaring sky. Dimmesdale felt a strange, almost intoxicating relief. The burden, for a moment, seemed lighter. He was not alone in his hypocrisy. He was with his secret embodied. Pearl, ever the child of impulse and truth, piped up, "Wilt thou stand here with mother and me, tomorrow noontide?" The minister flinched. The idea of public revelation, of daylight exposure, was still a terror he could not face. "No, my little Pearl," he whispered, "not now, not then. But at another time, Pearl, in a dark hour, we shall stand together." As if in answer to this cryptic promise, a meteor streaked across the dark expanse above, leaving a trail of fiery light. In Dimmesdale's fevered imagination, it seemed to trace a gigantic letter A against the canvas of the night sky, a cosmic sign of his perpetual shame. He squeezed Hester's hand, his gaze fixed on the fading celestial fire, convinced the heavens themselves conspired to reveal his guilt. Then, a chilling voice cut through the stillness. "Reverend Dimmesdale, is not this better than old Master Prynne at his night-long vigil?" Chillingworth stood below, a sardonic smile playing on his lips, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. He had found them, like a hunter finding his prey. The fragile solace of the scaffold vanished, replaced by a fresh wave of terror. The leech had come to claim his due. Chillingworth, ever the master manipulator, led Dimmesdale away, feigning concern, weaving a web of false sympathy. The minister, exhausted and utterly defeated, allowed himself to be led, the opportunity for confession once again receding into the impenetrable shadows. He returned to his study, the night's ordeal leaving him more broken than before. The scaffold, the meteor, the presence of Hester and Pearl, and the insidious appearance of Chillingworth, it had all been a cruel mirage of revelation, a momentary flirtation with truth that ultimately served only to bind him more tightly to his secret. The torture of secrecy continued, a slow, agonizing death of the spirit, a punishment far more cruel than any public execution. For in the agony of Arthur Dimmesdale, we see the terrible price of hidden sin, the destructive power of a truth unspoken, festering in the dark chambers of the soul. The sun, a merciless inquisitor in the vast, indifferent sky, beat down upon the marketplace of Boston. Our gaze, however, is drawn not to the shimmering heat on the cobblestones, nor to the oppressive weight of the Puritan judgment, but to a solitary figure upon the scaffold. Hester Prynne, holding her child Pearl, bore the scarlet stigma, not as a mark of shame, but almost as an emblem of a fierce, defiant spirit. Her eyes, though dimmed by sorrow, held a light that refused to be extinguished. The murmurs of the crowd, a restless, judgmental tide, swelled and receded around her, each whisper a lash, each stare a stone. And then, as if summoned from the very fringes of this stark new world, a new face emerged from the throng. A man somewhat past the middle age, with a scholarly air and shoulders slightly uneven. His garb, a mixture of civilized attire and the simple dress of a frontiersman, suggested a long absence, a journey through places wild and untamed. But it was his face that truly seized the eye, features sharpened by intellect, but now contorted by an instant of profound recognition, a shock so deep it seemed to strip away the very veneer of his soul. His dark, furrowed countenance, initially a mask of bewildered curiosity, solidified into something far more chilling. Hester saw him. Her breath hitched, her stoicism faltered, a desperate tremor passing through her frame. Her hand instinctively tightened on Pearl, a silent, internal scream caught in her throat. For she knew him intimately, terrifyingly. It was her husband, Roger Chillingworth, lost to the vastness of the sea, presumed dead, now returned from the spectral shores of the wilderness. His finger rose, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, touching his lips, a command for silence, a demand for their shared secret to remain buried. The blood drained from Hester's face, leaving it ashen, a deathly pallor beneath the vibrant scarlet. The revelation, sharp and cold, struck her not as a comfort, but as a fresh torment, promising a deeper, more insidious agony than the public shame she currently endured. Chillingworth, with a remarkable self-possession that belied the turmoil surely raging within him, turned to a grizzled townsman nearby. His voice was low, controlled, almost clinical. "Good sir," he inquired, his gaze never quite leaving Hester, "canst thou tell me the nature of the public show yonder? And who is she, the woman thus exhibited?" The townsman, eager to provide the details of this moral spectacle, recounted the story with relish. Hester Prynne, a married woman whose husband had been lost at sea, now standing condemned for adultery, refusing to name the father of her child. And her penalty? Chillingworth pressed, a strange, calculating glint entering his eyes. "Methinks it is a lenient one, if the ignominy of the scaffold be all." "Nay, good sir, not so," replied the townsman. "She is condemned to wear the scarlet letter A upon her bosom for the remainder of her natural life." Chillingworth nodded slowly, a thoughtful, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "It is well thought, and doubt not but it will prove a painful one. But the man, good sir, the father of the child, I marvel that they have not sought to know him, and to put shame upon him likewise." The townsman sighed, a collective sigh of the community. "Ah, but she hath been stubborn. The magistrates, the governor, even the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale himself, hath striven with her to persuade her to utter the name, but all in vain. She stands fast." And indeed, as he spoke, the very magistrates and ministers, solemn and severe, were gathered at the edge of the scaffold. Governor Bellingham, a man of stern visage and rigid piety, addressed Hester directly. "Hester Prynne," he intoned, his voice booming with the authority of the law and God, "I exhort thee to say the name of him who is thy fellow sinner. Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him." Reverend Mr. Wilson, an aged and venerable divine, echoed the sentiment, urging her to confess, to ease her soul. But it was when Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale stepped forward that the atmosphere shifted, growing taut with an unspoken tension. He was a young man, though marked by an almost unnatural pallor, his features refined, his eyes earnest yet shadowed by a deep, inward suffering. His voice, when it came, was tremulous, yet imbued with a profound, almost agonizing earnestness. "Hester Prynne," he pleaded, his gaze fixed upon her, "if thou feelest it to be for thy soul's peace, and that thy earthly punishment will thereby be made more effectual to salvation, I charge thee to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner. Be not silent from any vain or worldly motives. What can avail the silent agony thou heapest upon him, unless thou tellest his name? Believe me, Hester, good counsel comes from me, even if from no other man, for I, thy spiritual guide, do beseech thee, speak out the name! And if thou feelest it to be no wrong to him, then, in God's name, speak!" His words, delivered with such an intensity of emotion, such a visible struggle that mirrored Hester's own, seemed to pierce the very air. The crowd held its breath. Hester looked at him, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding, a shared secret throbbing between them. Pearl, sensing the raw emotion, stretched out her small hands towards the minister. But Hester's resolve, forged in the fires of her anguish, held firm. Her lips, though quivering, parted only to utter a single unwavering word, charged with defiance and an unyielding loyalty. "Never," she cried, her voice clear and strong despite the weight of the world upon her. "I will not speak, and my child must seek a heavenly father. She shall never know an earthly one." The crowd gasped. The magistrates shook their heads, defeated. The moment passed, leaving a heavy silence. Hester Prynne was led back to the prison, her scarlet letter a blazing beacon of her solitude. But among the receding figures, one man remained, his gaze distant, yet sharp. Roger Chillingworth. The initial shock had given way to a quiet, cold fury. The knowledge that Hester had borne another's child, that she had protected him with such fierce resolve, had planted a seed within him. A seed of vengeance, meticulously watered by the bitterness of betrayal and the insidious tendrils of his own damaged pride. His intellectual curiosity, once a benign force, now seemed to twist and sharpen into a tool of calculated retribution. He had returned not merely to claim a lost past, but to embark upon a chilling descent, a deliberate mission to uncover the secret, to root out the hidden sin, and to exact a terrible, slow payment. The poison, subtle and insidious, had found its vessel. The hunt had begun. Years bled into one another, not in a gentle merging, but as the relentless turning of a mill-wheel grinding grain. The Scarlet Letter, once a fiery brand, had settled into a kind of grim permanence upon Hester Prynne's breast. It no longer screamed its accusation in the ears of all who beheld it, but rather hummed a low, constant thrum of shame, a background score to her quiet, isolated existence. Yet, if the letter was a constant, fixed agony, Pearl, her child, was a living, breathing torment, as fluid and unpredictable as the ocean tide, and far more perplexing. From the very earliest stirrings of her consciousness, Pearl was a wonder and a woe. A creature of rare beauty, yes, but a beauty infused with an unsettling wildness. Her eyes, dark and deep, held a mischievous intelligence that often seemed to mock the solemnity of the Puritan world around her. Her movements were never clumsy, never wholly childish, but possessed a singular grace, an almost elfin quickness that suggested she was not quite of this earth, not quite a product of human flesh and blood. A sprite, an elf, a fairy changeling, these were the whispers that followed her and Hester, even from those who would never dare speak such blasphemy aloud. Hester, in her lonely cottage by the sea, found herself not only mother but captor and captive both. Pearl was her sole companion, her only joy, and her profoundest sorrow. There were no other children for Pearl to play with. The stern mothers of Boston kept their innocent offspring well away from the imp of sin, and Pearl, for her part, showed no inclination for conventional childish society. She fashioned her own companions figures of moss and burdock, dolls of rags and wildflowers, which she would array and direct in elaborate, silent dramas of judgment and scorn. Often, these little dramas would culminate in a dramatic, imaginary punishment, and the central figure of scorn would invariably be an effigy of Hester, bearing a crimson A upon its breast. When Hester sought to guide her, to shape her, to impress upon her the very rudiments of human sympathy, Pearl would recoil. Discipline in the accepted sense was an impossibility. Her spirit was too buoyant, too untamed. A word of command would be met with a laugh, a look of disapproval with a knowing, unsettling smile. She was like a wild flower, refusing the rigid confines of a cultivated garden, drawing sustenance from some unseen, untamed spring. Hester would sometimes catch herself wondering, with a shudder, if Pearl possessed a human soul at all, or if she was merely a vessel for some primal, elemental spirit. But it was Pearl's persistent, almost preternatural fascination with the Scarlet Letter that truly tormented Hester. From the moment she was old enough to discern shapes and colors, the letter became her plaything, her focal point. Her tiny, baby finger, barely able to grasp, would reach out and lay itself upon the gleaming embroidery. She would laugh, a clear bell-like sound as she touched it, and then look up at Hester with those deep, knowing eyes, as if privy to a profound secret. Later, as she began to babble, her first intelligible word, apart from mother, seemed to be A, spoken with a sharp, inquisitive inflection. It was as if the letter had found its voice, its conscious embodiment, in the person of this tiny child. It was a constant, inescapable reminder, not just for the world, but for Hester herself, of the sin that had brought Pearl into being. Pearl would point to it, tug at it, demand to know its meaning, and Hester, her heart aching, could only offer vague, evasive answers, knowing that the truth was too harsh, too complex, for such a young, wild spirit. The children of the town, naturally cruel in their innocence, would sometimes gather to mock Hester as she walked, a solitary figure with her oddly beautiful child. Their taunts would cut deeply, their stones, literal or metaphorical, would sting. But Pearl, her small fists clenched, her eyes ablaze, would chase them off, not with childish taunts, but with an almost preternatural fury, pelting them with stones picked from the dusty road, her face a mask of fierce protectiveness. She was a tiny avenger, defending her mother's shame with an intensity that unnerved even Hester. It was clear then that Pearl existed outside the conventional bonds of human sympathy. Her loyalty was fierce, but her methods were almost savage. Hester, in those moments, would gaze into Pearl's deep, dark eyes, seeking an answer to the profound riddle of her existence. Was Pearl a blessing sent from God, albeit one shrouded in such bewildering forms? Or was she, as some whispers suggested, a fiend, a child of the black man, sent to tempt Hester further into perdition, to prevent her ever achieving true penitence? The question was a constant echo in her heart, a shadow that stretched over every tender moment, every shared glance. She loved Pearl with every fiber of her being, a fierce, protective love born of shared isolation and profound connection, yet she also feared her, feared the strange, untamed spirit that resided within her daughter. Pearl, the living letter, the breathing symbol of a forbidden passion, was a burden, a mystery, and an inexplicable joy. She was the Scarlet Letter made flesh, forever bound to Hester, a constant, vivid reminder of transgression, yet also the only pure love Hester had known since her fall. And so, our Hester lived, tethered to her shame by the very heartstrings of her being, forever reminded, forever questioning, as the wild child, Pearl, danced her enigmatic dance through the harsh realities of Puritan life, a beacon of truth, however painful, in a world steeped in hypocrisy and rigid dogma. The iron portal groaned shut for the last time, not with the abrupt finality of a sentence declared, but with a weary sigh, like a world-weary giant settling into slumber. Hester Prynne, at last, was free from the tangible confines of the prison. The sunlight, though still pale in the crisp New England air, felt less like a blessing and more like a spotlight, highlighting the scarlet letter upon her breast for all to see. But freedom, my friends, is a peculiar commodity. One might expect her to flee, to seek anonymity in distant lands, to shed the oppressive weight of that small, judgment-bound community. Yet, she did not. No, Hester Prynne chose to stay. Why? Was it a strange, masochistic tether to the very soil where her sin had blossomed and been so publicly scourged? Perhaps, or perhaps, it was a subtle, almost unconscious magnetic pull towards the father of her child, towards the man whose secret, agonizing bond with her was a silent scream across the town square. Or, in a more profound sense, perhaps she understood that the true prison was not the stone walls, but the mark etched upon her soul, a mark no ocean could wash away, no new horizon could obscure. Her penance, she realized, was intrinsically linked to this place, this people. So, she sought refuge not far, but just beyond the fringes of the settlement, on a patch of barren ground where the wild roses tangled with the harsher coastal weeds. Her dwelling was a small, weather-beaten cottage, its solitude stark against the backdrop of the somber forest and the restless sea. No one would live so close to her, nor would anyone willingly venture near. It was a physical manifestation of her societal exile, a visible boundary separating the pure from the polluted. And there, with needle and thread, Hester found her solace and her curse. She was, you see, a mistress of the craft, her fingers imbued with an almost magical dexterity. She embroidered, with exquisite artistry, garments for the governor, ruffs for the ministers, even the tiny caps for newborn infants, everything but the bridal veil. Ah, the bridal veil! That purest emblem of innocence and new beginnings, that society deemed her forever unfit to touch. Her work adorned the very people who scorned her, their vanity overriding their moral outrage, a subtle hypocrisy that did not escape the discerning eye of our master storyteller. The Scarlet Letter itself, now a thing of beauty, a marvel of gold thread and intricate design, became a macabre advertisement for her skill, and a testament to her unending shame. Daily she walked the narrow paths of the town, not defiantly, but with a quiet, enduring dignity. Yet the air around her was thick with unspoken accusations, with the rustle of whispers that died as she approached, only to ignite again like smoldering embers once she passed. Clergymen, from their pulpits, held her up as the living embodiment of sin, a cautionary tale to frighten the righteous into unwavering piety. Children, innocent yet cruel, mimicked their elders, pointing and shrieking, There is the woman with the Scarlet Letter, and the very paupers she clothed and fed, whose shivering bodies she warmed with her charity, would often offer a cold, disdainful glance, as if her touch tainted their meager comfort. Hester bore it all, a silent martyr to a judgment that never ended. She had accepted her sentence, not just the 7 hours on the scaffold, but the lifelong crucifixion of public scorn. Each sneer, each averted gaze, each cruel word was a fresh wound, but she absorbed them, adding them to the burden she carried. This was her path to redemption. She believed this unending penance. But a strange faculty blossomed within her, a painful, almost supernatural sensitivity. The Scarlet Letter, it seemed, had become a conduit, allowing her to perceive the hidden sins in the hearts of others. When she encountered someone in the crowd, a seemingly devout elder, a sanctimonious matron, a respected merchant, a sudden throb in her branded bosom would signal a secret corruption, a hidden hypocrisy. She felt a sympathetic pang, a kinship with these veiled transgressors, for she knew, with an agonizing certainty, that had their transgressions been brought to light, they too would wear a scarlet letter, albeit an invisible one. And in this revelation, my friends, lies the true villainy. It was not merely Hester's sin that brought her low, but the collective, relentless, unforgiving judgment of society. Society, in its rigid adherence to outward piety, became the instrument of prolonged torture, more merciless than any judge or jury. It was not just an individual fallen woman, but an entire community's unyielding cruelty, its inability to forgive, its desperate need to cast out and condemn, that transformed a private failing into a public, perpetual agony. The scaffold had been a moment, society's judgment was an eternity. The election day sun, though bright, seemed to cast a peculiar, somber hue upon the scene as the procession wound its way from the meeting house. A profound silence, born of awe and spiritual exhaustion, followed the minister's powerful sermon, a sermon so imbued with divine grace, so thrilling in its eloquence, that many had deemed it the most inspired utterance of his venerable career. Dimmesdale, the people's idol, now swayed perceptibly, his physical frame appearing as if it might at any moment relinquish the soul that burned so fiercely within it. His face, though transfigured by the recent fervor, bore also the marks of long, unutterable suffering. Hester Prynne stood by the scaffold, her own scarlet letter burning upon her breast with an intensified, almost triumphant glow, watching him pass. Pearl, ever the vivid emblem of her mother's sin and sorrow, danced restlessly beside her, her gaze fixed with a child's unerring intuition upon the ailing clergyman. Hester, too, felt an unshakable conviction that this moment, long dreaded yet long anticipated, was at hand. The forest, with its brief, illusory promise of freedom, now seemed a distant dream, replaced by the stark, unyielding truth of this public square. Suddenly, a voice low and insidious as a serpent's hiss, breathed close to Dimmesdale's ear. It was Roger Chillingworth, his face a mask of malevolent concern. "My worthy friend," he urged, his hand gripping the minister's arm, "you are weak. Let me support you. This crowd, this press of bodies, it will overwhelm you. Come, lean on your old friend, let us seek the shelter of the governor's hall." But the minister, with a strength that seemed born of desperation, shook off the physician's grasp. A terrible luminous light, akin to a death flash, appeared in his eyes. His gaze swept over the multitude, then settled upon Hester and Pearl standing by the very scaffold where Hester had endured her first public ignominy. With a sudden, piercing cry that cut through the hushed reverence of the crowd, he halted. "Hester," he called, his voice now weak, yet charged with an authority that brooked no denial. "Hester, come hither, and tarry a moment. Thou too, Pearl, child, come hither now." A collective gasp rippled through the populace. What fresh madness was this? Their sainted minister, calling forth the branded woman and her elfish child in this sacred hour. Chillingworth, his face contorted with a fury born of thwarted revenge, sprang forward again. "Madman, hold, what is your purpose? Tempt not to the last moment of your safety." But it was too late. Dimmesdale, with an almost supernatural effort, ascended the steps of the scaffold. He stretched out a trembling hand to Hester, who, without a moment's hesitation, joined him there, pulling Pearl along. The three stood together, finally, upon that platform of shame and revelation, under the unblinking eye of God and man. "Ye that have beheld me in my agony," Dimmesdale began, his voice gaining a strange, resonant power as he addressed the astounded throng. "Ye that have denied me not your reverence, look now at me! Ye that deemed me holy, pure, and true, behold me, the one sinner of the world, the one whose guilt is blacker than all others." He paused, a terrible silence descending upon the square, broken only by the distant murmur of the sea and the anxious stir of the crowd. His eyes, burning with a feverish intensity, met Hester's, then swept across the faces of the magistrates, the elders, the common folk, all those who had honored him, all those he had deceived. For 7 years I have borne a lie. For 7 years I have lived in torture, a living death, with a festering secret in my heart. And this woman, this Hester Prynne, hath been a living sermon against sin, while I, the unconfessed partner, stood by and preached of righteousness. He turned to Hester, his hand grasping hers. God knows, and he knows me. The man whom ye have deemed holy, I have been a hypocrite. I have sinned most grievously. Then with a desperate, rending gesture, he tore open the ecclesiastical vestment from his breast. A terrible groan, a collective gasp of horror and understanding, rose from the crowd. For there, imprinted upon his flesh, in the same hues of flame and ignominy as Hester's own, was a scarlet letter. Or so it seemed to many, a visceral symbol of his secret torment, an enduring stigmata of his hidden guilt. Behold, he cried, his voice now fading, yet ringing with the triumph of truth, thus art thou punished, Hester, for thy truth, and thus verily in the sight of men hath not the terrible judgment begun. Pearl, her face radiant with a newfound understanding, no longer a mischievous sprite, reached up and, for the first time, kissed her father on the lips. It was a kiss of love, of acceptance, of recognition, the breaking of the spell, the forging of the final link in the chain of their shared humanity. Chillingworth, standing below, looked on with a ghastly, defeated expression, his malevolence draining from him like poison from a broken vial. Thou hast escaped me, he muttered, his voice hoarse with despair. Thou hast escaped me by dying, by confession! Dimmesdale swayed, his strength utterly spent. He fell into Hester's arms, his gaze fixed heavenward. God's will be done, he whispered, a smile of serene peace gracing his lips, his mercy and his judgment. Oh God, thou art merciful! This is better than I deserve! And with a final, shuddering breath, the minister of the gospel, the hidden sinner, found his release from the earthly scaffold and stepped into the eternal. A profound silence descended once more, but this was a silence born not of awe alone, but of perplexity, sorrow, and a terrible understanding of the interconnectedness of human sin and suffering. The scaffold, once a symbol of Hester's solitary shame, had become the scaffold of truth, cleansing, with its final, terrible revelation, the souls of a town and its most revered man. Gather round, my friends. Let us speak of shadows, not the fleeting ones that dance on sunlit walls, but those that cling to the very chambers of the heart. We know the legend of Hester Prynne, branded by a letter of scarlet, a stark testament to a moment of human frailty, emblazoned for all to see. But what of the letters we carry? The ones invisible to the world, yet etched deeply within our own souls. The A of regret, the S of perceived shame, the F of a fear we dare not voice. This week, we embark on a quiet journey, a pilgrimage into the most intimate landscapes of our being, to gently unpack our own scarlet letters. For 7 days, we will turn inward with a kindness and courage often reserved only for strangers. Today, let the first breath be one of simple acknowledgement. What is that unbidden weight you've been carrying, perhaps for years, perhaps unconsciously? It might not be a grand public transgression, but a quiet, persistent whisper. Is it a past mistake that still echoes in the quiet hours, painting itself across your self-worth? A perceived inadequacy that makes you shrink from opportunities? Perhaps it's a secret ambition deemed foolish by others, or a private pain you guard fiercely, lest it be misunderstood. Like Hester's letter, your might not be visible on your cloak, but its presence is deeply felt, a constant hum beneath the surface of your daily life. Do not judge it, do not try to erase it. Simply, for today, acknowledge its existence. Give it a name, if only in the silent sanctuary of your heart. This is not about self-flagellation, but courageous honesty. Remember Dimmesdale's silent torment, the invisible A that festered within, far more destructive than Hester's public badge. Sometimes, my friends, the letters we hide are the heaviest. As we step into our next phase, let us delve deeper into the weight of this letter. Where does it reside within you? Is it a tightness in your chest, a tension in your shoulders, a cloud in your mind? And crucially, whose hand embroidered it there? Was it a parental expectation, a societal norm, a careless word from a forgotten peer? Or did you, in a moment of harsh self-condemnation, stitch it onto yourself? So often, we become our own most relentless accusers. We internalize perceived failures and wear them like a shroud, believing them to be the whole truth of who we are. Consider how the stern Puritan community placed the A upon Hester, but also how Hester, through sheer force of will and a lifetime of grace, eventually transformed it. Your letter, whether born of external judgment or self-imposed, has undoubtedly shaped you. Acknowledge that profound influence, but without allowing it to define your entire being. Every Scarlet Letter, no matter its origin, has a story woven around it. What is the narrative you've constructed around yours? Is it a relentless tale of failure, of irreversible damage, of an inadequacy that will forever hold you back? Often our perception, sharpened by fear and rumination, is far more potent than the event itself. We replay the scene endlessly, adding more drama, more judgment, more finality with each iteration. Today, I invite you to step into the role of the master storyteller for your own life, rather than remaining a mere character in a story you didn't fully write. What if your A isn't simply a mark of shame, but a profound marker of resilience? A testament to a path bravely taken, a lesson hard learned, a challenge profoundly overcome. Imagine how Hester's story shifted over time from a public sinner to a compassionate comforter, from an outcast to a woman whose strength was undeniable. She did not erase the A, she infused it with new, life-affirming meaning. Let us now turn our gaze to the subtle whispers of society that often feed our private burdens. Sometimes, our Scarlet Letter isn't just about an individual act or feeling, but about the insidious societal pressures we internalize. The unspoken rules, the relentless ideals of perfection, the profound fear of not belonging. Think of the unyielding gaze of the Puritan community, constantly fixed upon Hester. Do you feel those eyes on you, even when no one is truly watching? Are you afraid of being found out, of not measuring up to an invisible standard? Today, let's bravely challenge those external whispers. Whose voices are they truly? And do they align with your deepest values, your most authentic truth? Reclaim your inner space from the hollow echoes of external judgment. Your inherent worth, my dear friends, is not and never has been determined by the fleeting opinions of others. What if your Scarlet Letter, in its own peculiar and painful way, has bestowed upon you a unique, albeit unexpected, gift? Perhaps it has fostered within you a profound empathy for human struggle, deepened your understanding of the complexities of life, or spurred you towards greater compassion for those who suffer in silence. Hester's A made her an outcast, yes, but it also granted her a profound insight into the human heart, enabling her to comfort those in suffering and offer wisdom where none dared before. Look at your own A through this transformative lens. What unexpected wisdom has it imparted? What quiet strength has it forged within you? This is not about condoning past errors or dismissing pain, but about acknowledging the growth, the resilience, the profound understanding that can spring from even the most painful, forgotten soil. This shift in perspective, this gentle reframing, can begin to loosen its tenacious grip. As we near the culmination of our week, let us engage in a powerful act of reimagination. Hester's A eventually transcended its original, punitive meaning, becoming something far greater, something more profound. From adulterer, it began to signify able, angel, artist, a symbol of her strength, her empathy, her artistry in life. Today, I invite you to reimagine your own Scarlet Letter. What new meaning, what profound insight, can you consciously bestow upon it? Can it transform from a mark of shame into a badge of courage, a testament to your endurance? From a sign of perceived failure into a symbol of fierce resilience? This is not about denial, it is about conscious redefinition. It is about taking back the narrative, seizing the pen, and imbuing your story with your own power, your own grace. What new letter, what new word, what new powerful story do you choose to weave around it? And so, we arrive at our seventh and final day of this intimate journey. You have acknowledged your Scarlet Letter, explored its origins, challenged its narrative, and bravely begun to reimagine its meaning. Today, the profound work is not to erase it, for that would be to deny a part of your rich tapestry. Rather, it is to integrate it. To understand, truly, that this part of your story does not diminish your wholeness, but rather contributes to the profound, intricate, and beautiful tapestry of who you are. Like Hester, who even after the initial shame faded and she was free to discard it, chose to return and wear the A again as a symbol of wisdom, comfort, and hard-won understanding, you too can choose to carry your past not as a crushing burden, but as a deep source of strength, empathy, and unique insight. Release the shame, embrace the profound learning. You are whole, you are capable, and you are ready to write the next magnificent chapter, unburdened by the tyranny of an unexamined past. Your Scarlet Letter, my dear friends, is now a compass, pointing you towards deeper unda. Ah, welcome back, my friend. Pull up a chair, won't you? The embers of our discussion on Hawthorne's grand, tragic symphony, the Scarlet Letter, are still aglow, and though we've walked its shadowed paths together, there remains a certain perfume, a lingering resonance that begs for one final, intimate conversation. We've seen the scaffold, felt the prick of the A, and heard the silent scream of a soul in torment. But what, truly, does it all mean? What are the bedrock truths, the enduring echoes that this profound tale whispers across the centuries? Let's distill it, shall we? Like extracting the purest, most potent essence from a wild, blooming herb. I find when the dust has settled and the final page turned, that three core truths rise to greet us, unshakable and eternal. The first, and perhaps most piercing, truth is this: Rex, the deadliest prison, isn't built of stone and iron, but of unconfessed sin. Think of our dear Hester Prynne. Her shame was public, branded onto her very breast for all the world to see, to whisper about, to shun. And yes, it was a torment. It stripped her bare, exposed her wounds to the biting wind of societal judgment. Yet, in that very act of public confession, in the very endurance of her open ignominy, she found a strange, hard-won freedom. She was known. Her sin, though a heavy burden, was a visible one, and through bearing it, through living with it, she began a torturous but ultimately redemptive journey. She crafted, she sewed, she served, she thought. Her spirit, though battered, was never truly broken because it was never truly hidden. Now, contrast that with the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale. Oh, that poor, brilliant, tormented man! His sin was known only to God, Hester, and himself and the devil in the guise of Chillingworth. He kept his transgression locked away in the deepest vault of his being, preaching eloquently of sin while embodying its most corrosive power. And what was the result? Not freedom, but a slow, agonizing self-immolation. His guilt gnawed at his vitals, warped his spirit, turned his piety into a performance, and hollowed him out from the inside. He lived a lie, and that lie became his torturer, slowly draining his life force, painting lines of agony upon his face that no one truly understood, until his final, liberating confession on the very same scaffold where Hester had stood 13 years prior. His prison was invisible, yes, but it was infinitely more crushing, more soul-destroying than any public shame. The novel, in its heart, screams this truth: secrecy is the true damnation, and confession, however painful, the only path to genuine release. Which brings us, quite naturally, to our second profound truth: society, in its rigid adherence to outward morality, often becomes blind to true justice and breeds its own hypocrisy. The Puritan community in Boston, with its stern laws and unyielding gaze, believed itself to be righteous. It sought to purify, to punish, to enforce a God-fearing order. And indeed, it did punish Hester. It branded her, isolated her, made her an outcast. But did it achieve justice? Or did it merely perpetrate a different kind of cruelty, a moral blindness that failed to address the root causes of sin, or the complexities of the human heart? Consider their treatment of Hester versus their veneration of Dimmesdale. Hester, the public sinner, was cast out. Dimmesdale, the secret sinner, was elevated, his sermons growing ever more powerful, his suffering interpreted as saintly affliction. The community saw only the surface, the eye on Hester's chest, and the piety on Dimmesdale's lips. They couldn't see the torment beneath the minister's robes, nor the profound strength and burgeoning wisdom blossoming within Hester's outcast heart. This societal hypocrisy, this focus on superficial adherence to law over genuine compassion and understanding, created a climate where Dimmesdale withered and Hester, though shamed, paradoxically found room to grow outside the suffocating confines of their judgment. They became the unwitting agents of his destruction and her unlikely, hard-won transcendence. The novel challenges us to look beyond the letter of the law, to question the morality of those who judge, and to see the deep, often contradictory currents that run beneath the placid surface of societal norms. And finally, my friend, we come to the third, most enduring, and perhaps most beautiful truths: the human heart, in its vast capacity for love, suffering, and resilience, can forge its own path to redemption, often outside the dictates of conventional morality. The story of Hester Prynne is not one of simple punishment and repentance. It's a testament to the unyielding, transformative power of love, especially the love for her child, Pearl. Pearl, wild and elfin, a living embodiment of the Scarlet Letter itself, was both Hester's torment and her salvation. It was for Pearl that Hester endured, for Pearl that she learned strength, for Pearl that she fought against despair. And what of the complex, tangled love between Hester and Dimmesdale? It was a forbidden, destructive love, yet it was also the deepest, most authentic connection either of them ever knew. In the forest, away from the judgmental eyes of the town, they found a fleeting moment of truth, of shared humanity, where their bond, though born of sin, was reaffirmed as a powerful, undeniable force. Their path to redemption wasn't through the church's absolution or society's forgiveness, but through the crucible of their own suffering, their own choices, their own enduring, albeit tragic, love. Hester returns to Boston after years away, not because she has to, but because she chooses to, embracing her not as a brand of shame, but as a symbol of hard-won wisdom, a beacon for those who suffer. She becomes, in her own way, a spiritual guide, dispensing counsel and comfort, her Scarlet Letter now a badge of empathy rather than infamy. Her redemption is not a clean slate, but a rich tapestry woven from sorrow and strength, love and sacrifice. So there you have them, the three deep currents that run beneath the surface of this magnificent, haunting novel: the destructive power of unconfessed sin, the hypocrisies of societal judgment, and the indomitable spirit of the human heart in its quest for a unique and personal redemption. The Scarlet Letter doesn't give us easy answers. Instead, it holds up a mirror to the timeless struggles of humanity, inviting us to look closer, to feel deeper, and to ponder the indelible marks that sin, shame, and love leave upon the soul. It asks us not just to read, but to truly see. And that, my friend, is a truth worth remembering. The heavy oak door creaks shut behind us, leaving the dim lamplight of Dimmesdale's study or the stark sunlight of the scaffold far behind. We've journeyed through shadowed forests and bustling marketplaces, witnessed the crushing weight of public shame, and felt the corrosive burn of secret guilt. We've seen a letter, embroidered with such vivid scarlet, transform from a brand of ignominy to a symbol of strength and even grace. But the story, my friends, does not truly end with the final page. It merely opens another, a vibrant, echoing chamber where the real work begins. For the Scarlet Letter is not just a tale from a distant past, a curiosity preserved under glass. It is a mirror held up to every age, every community, every solitary heart. And now, having borne witness to Hester Prynne's silent suffering, to Dimmesdale's tormented conscience, to Chillingworth's vengeful decay, it's time for us to step from the shadows of observation into the bright light of conversation. Think back to the unforgiving gaze of the Puritan townsfolk. That collective stare, laden with judgment and self-righteousness, still resonates. Today, the town square has expanded, transformed into a global, digital amphitheater. A single misstep, a whispered rumor, a moment of perceived weakness, and suddenly, the Scarlet Letter of public condemnation can be stitched onto anyone's digital profile, amplified by 1,000 faceless voices. How quickly we forget the complexity of human experience, the nuances of intent, the delicate balance of truth and perception, when we join the clamor of judgment. What, then, does Hester's enduring strength, in the face of such relentless scrutiny, teach us about resilience, about the courage to stand firm against the tide of popular opinion, even when that opinion seeks to define and diminish us? And what of Dimmesdale? His hidden sin gnawing at his vitals, a festering wound beneath the polished facade of his piety. We often speak of the importance of authenticity, of living truthfully, but how many of us carry our own hidden burdens, our own unconfessed transgressions, believing that silence is a shield when it is, in fact, a suffocating cloak? The novel begs us to consider what is the true cost of concealment, not just to ourselves, but to those we love, to the communities we serve. Is there liberation in confession, even if it comes at the price of societal disapproval? Or is the burden of truth too heavy for some to bear alone? This is a conversation not just about sin, but about vulnerability, about the courage it takes to be truly seen, flaws and all. Then there is Chillingworth, a chilling testament to the corrosive power of vengeance. His transformation, from a wronged husband to a demonic torturer, serves as a stark warning. What happens when we allow bitterness to take root in our hearts, to consume our very being? When does the pursuit of justice morph into a destructive quest for retribution? In an age often marked by divisiveness and a quickness to condemn, the story of Chillingworth compels us to examine our own impulses, to consider the long-term consequences of holding on to hatred. How do we break cycles of resentment? Where do we find the grace to forgive, or at least to release ourselves from the grip of a consuming anger, both for others and for ourselves? The Scarlet Letter is also a profound meditation on the nature of grace, redemption, and the potential for humanity to find beauty even in the ruins of disgrace. Hester, through her quiet service, her compassionate heart, eventually redefines the very meaning of her mark. She doesn't just endure, she transforms. She doesn't just suffer, she grows. This invites us to question our own definitions of good and evil, of purity and sin. Can society truly redeem those it has cast out? Or is redemption an intensely personal journey, forged in the crucible of one's own conscience, regardless of external validation? What role do empathy and understanding play in healing the wounds of judgment, both historical and contemporary? This is why, my friends, the conversation must continue. It is not enough to simply read Hester's story, we must engage with it, wrestle with its uncomfortable truths, and allow its challenging questions to resonate within our own lives. Where do we see the Scarlet Letter manifesting in our world today? Is it in the labels we affix to individuals based on their past mistakes, their socioeconomic status, their identity? Is it in the silent judgments we pass, the whispers of gossip, the quick dismissal of those who don't conform to our norms? We are called to do more than observe the human drama unfolding in these pages. We are invited to participate in a dialogue that spans centuries, to bring our own perspectives, our own experiences, and our own empathy to bear on these timeless themes. What does justice look like? How do we balance individual freedom with societal order? When does compassion trump condemnation? How do we foster a world where true authenticity is celebrated, and where the grace of second chances is not just a whispered hope, but a guiding principle? So, let us open these conversations. In our book clubs, around our dinner tables, in our classrooms, and within the quiet chambers of our own minds. Let us dare to question, to challenge, to understand. Let us seek to see the humanity in those we might otherwise judge, and to extend grace where judgment might once have resided. For in discussing the trials of Hester, Dimmesdale, and Chillingworth, we are, in essence, discussing ourselves, our society, and the enduring quest for truth, forgiveness, and genuine connection. The story lives on, not just in print, but in every thoughtful word we exchange, in every empathetic bridge we build. Let the conversation begin.